heard somebody say that manufacturing done more to help people out of poverty than any of the charity work or different kind of things. And it just made sense then, because I realized how manufacturing can reduce prices and increase the living standards, because you can reduce the inputs and you can produce so much that it gives people a way to get up and out of poverty.
Welcome, everybody, to Equality Podcast Season 2. Today, we're excited to have with us James Davis. James is an industrial engineer with Epitec, and what caught my attention was James's headline in LinkedIn: "I believe that talk and lean help make people's lives better," and that really resonated with me. We're going to have a great conversation about that today. So, James, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm an industrial engineer. I went through school the first time, and I didn't do so well in electrical engineering. And I went out and lived life for a while, and then went back to school in my early 30s. And I really didn't understand industrial engineering, but I knew I kind of liked accounting. And I was reading through all the stuff, and I thought it fit me better than electrical. And then I was listening some podcasts then, and I heard somebody say that manufacturing done more to help people out of poverty than any of the charity work or different kind of things. And it just made sense then, because I realized how manufacturing can reduce prices and increase the living standards, because you can reduce the inputs and you can produce so much that it gives people a way to get up and out of poverty. And that just struck with me, and it kind of cemented me into industrial engineering, and then kind of guided the way I was thinking from there. So that's awesome. A little short history.
Yeah, great. I really, I like that story because it resonates a lot with my values, and how I think about things, and in my journey of continuous improvement, improving businesses, even consulting. What I really want to do is make people's lives better. And I've worked in operations. I've worked in, massive factories and some smaller ones. And I've worked in some that were great places to work. And the worst day was coming in saying, well, I guess I have to work for 8 hours, make my paycheck, right? And the best day, you were engaged and learning and doing stuff. And then I worked in other plants where every day was, holy shit, I don't want to look that guy in the face, and I don't want anyone to experience that, right?
I've been meaning to apologize to you about that.
Oh, I forgive you, Jake. I think we've mended that bridge. So, I appreciate you publicly apologizing for your face. But who hasn't worked at least one job that sucked? And sometimes the suckage is because of crappy leaders, but more often than not, it's the result of crappy processes. Like, the way you're actually doing the work is difficult. There's a lot of opportunity for it to just fail, and you don't have control over it. And in my experience, that is the most fearful and psychologically unsafe for an employee to be in, is an environment where they don't have control over the outcomes, but they're held accountable for the outcomes. And unfortunately, that's a large portion of jobs out there at multiple levels, right?
Yeah, it's the red bead experiment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tell that to our audience.
So you've got to read Deming and watch some of his videos. There's actually, I looked for a while and I couldn't find any, and then somehow they're there now. I don't know, but there's actually video of Deming running some of those experiments, which is wild, because he's got this very interesting cadence of how he talks. And once you listen to him for a little bit, you'll never be able to read anything he has that you think he said without reading it in Deming's voice.
Right.
I don't do impressions. I wish I could, but it's like Morgan Freeman or something. You just know how he sounds. But yeah, so being accountable and without having control. So the red bead experiment is you get some people together and you give them this big tub of beads, and there's some red beads mixed in with white beads, and you give them a scoop and you say, all right, your job is to scoop beads, don't get any red beads in there. And then you scoop beads, and of course you don't have any control of your scoop or what the bead situation is. And then you scoop, and somebody marks down and it's like 3, and then the person behind you scoops and it's 2, and the person behind you scoops and it's 5. And then Demi comes up behind you and goes, good job today, John. Janice, you've got 5 beads. We're gonna have to work that out. And so, if you can't improve your performance, then we're going to have to discussion. So it goes through a couple more trials, and then by randomness, and finally somebody's got like 10, 15 beads compared to anybody else. And he's like, oh yeah, your performance is really poor, and we're just going to have to let you go, or some kind of reprimand. So it's a very easy way to show how sometimes things that are outside of your control, you're being held accountable for, like quality or supplier defects, or things in your process that you can't control, like maybe the screw gun's over torqued, or the machinery that you're working with messes up. And I think it's more to not to get the employees to feel better about their jobs, but to kind of shake management up some, to say, hey, look, you got to be aware that the position you've put your employees in, that you're not giving them a system to fail and a bad process, and then trying to hold them accountable for that. And it's just trivial for you, because now you're looking in the wrong direction for what's actually the problem.
Yeah, great exposition of that powerful visual learning that Deming put out. And really, that's the root of what we're talking about. Is the process is going to introduce some bad outputs, but we hold people accountable. And I think Deming had kind of a crusade against that, which he should have. But the other side of that is, here we are 40 years later, and we're still doing the same stuff.
So 100 years later.
Yeah, 100 years later.
If you go back, I mean, I think it's Bobby. I can't say his last name. Emiliani. I'm sorry, Bob, but he's a professor, and he's got
Bob Emiliani.
There you go.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about.
Time out. We have to make this very clear, because I don't want to offend Professor Bob. So
yes,
just in case he watches this video, which he won't, because our videos suck, but Bob Emiliani, Professor Bob Emiliani, who we respect and hold in high esteem. We're sorry for butchering your name. Okay, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Professor Bob. I know a little bit. Unfortunately, I haven't read his books yet, but he's big. I've read Taylor. I know Taylor can be controversial for some people, but I read him in a light more favorable, I guess, as opposed to trying to read them with today's standards, or read it at a 1900s standard of the kind of situation that people lived in the 1900s.
Right. Yeah. We've evolved since then, but yes, he's still ahead of his time.
Right. And reading some of the works and some of the critiques of what Taylor was saying today is almost word for word what I hear out of factory people or factory today. It's like they read it and then repeated it, but they didn't. It just came out to say it's the exact same response, 100 years later. And so people are people, no matter what century they're in, apparently.
Yeah, I shared a funny on LinkedIn that was a leadership book, and the quote was, "The Lady Bird's leadership book of how to keep firing people until they figure it out."
Yeah.
And in that same vein, like, it seems like since that early 1900s, like, who's reading this book and sharing this knowledge with everybody? Because it's what every bad leader is doing everywhere.
Yeah, the old revolving door. So, James, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the situational nature of lean. So you're a big proponent of theory of constraints, which, by the way, I am as well. As a physics theory, talk really helped me more in optimizing specific operations. I think, than any other discipline.
Mm,
And then lean as well. So you're a big proponent of that, but we're going to put a but in there.
yeah.
Theory of constraints, lean, Six Sigma, whatever tools you're using for
Mm.
operational excellence and continuous improvement, they are situational. So tell me a little bit more about that. What's on your mind?
Let me get this idea that I wrote down when we were talking first. Talking about dimming, I just thought, if you ever wanted to be passive aggressively hate on your boss, just listen to Deming or read some of his books, because it's like, yes, 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 yes. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
that's what that guy's doing wrong. Okay, so situational lean. Um, the I, I've got a couple of different analogies that I like, but the one I like the most is, let's compare it to if your company wanted to be a professional weightlifter, right? So the big guys are like Toyota or something. It's the big lean, the the gold standard apparently. But if you're a professional weightlifter like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something, and you can't go out on day 1 or 2 and lift 350 pounds, it's not going to happen. So you go out, you try to lift that weight, and you pick it up, and you go, this is stupid. This doesn't work. And let's go back and do something else. And the guy standing beside you is going, yeah, I told you it wasn't going to work. There's no way we can lift that weight. They've got such a certain situation and stuff they're different than we are, so we'll never be able to do it. But yeah, it's situational, because your situation at that moment is maybe you can lift 80 pounds. You can only do the small part of it, and you can work up to that, but you can't start where you think other people are.
We now go to a brief quote from Deming, played by Christopher Walken. Guys, the beads, that was almost Bill Cosby there. That was a terrible impression.
That was a good one. I was liking it, man. You got to finish it.
Yeah.
We're putting that in the video.
Yeah. Guys, beads, the red ones, don't do it. You're fired. Get out of here. One of the things I loved when you introduced yourself, James, or noticed,
Yeah.
I shouldn't emotively say loved right out of the gate, but is that you had an affinity for accounting. And I think that people that do, as I am one of these people, it's like we tend to see the facility, like when we're at the Gimba, where the work is, in dollars and cents. Like you sit there and look at it, and you're dropping quarters out of your metaphorical pocket, just thinking it through. And I think that people that lack that strong foundation and affinity largely miss what it is we're trying to do. So it means a lot that you said that.
Well, I'm gonna shoot you right in the foot and say I have a disaffinity for cost accountants.
Good. Good. We agree on that then. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I feel kind of weird, because I have this. I think I picked it up out of the goal, and it was. I don't have a better term for that. Maybe you guys can help me, because I don't know who it is or what to call them. But it's the people who make decisions based on price or based on some other factor without taking the full set of circumstances.
We call those here.
Yes, there's plenty of those. But it's the kind of a-hole that will set up your accounting system where, like, I worked in fast food, where your metric was your manpower versus your sales for that hour. Not the day, not how well you did or how your sales increased, but for that hour, what was your ratio to manpower to, and if you didn't hit it that hour, then you failed. And so you were constantly looking to cut people off, out of your restaurant to try to make that manpower thing.
Yeah. We could probably have a whole show on
just on that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, lean and all of the tools we might use for continuous improvement being situational. I love the weightlifting metaphor. So you probably don't know, but I used to train for strongman. I used to train for strongman, and still hit the gym. I like to stay in shape, and it's fun. But strongman and powerlifting, and probably Olympic weightlifting, although I've never tried it, but the methodology is pretty much the same, which is you do a motion and you do it heavier and heavier until you fail.
Right.
When you fail, you know why, you know what failed. So you might squat and then you put another plate on the bar and you squat and you do that until you can't get 3 green lights in powerlifting. And okay, so why did I fail? Did I get down to the bottom and couldn't come back up? Did I get halfway up? Okay, so it's my posterior chain, or it's my hamstring specifically, or my lower back, that's what's weak. And then you implement what they call supplemental exercises to build up whatever part of the strength chain is the weakest link, right? And you just do that over and over. And, if you're intentional and knowledgeable and controlling your other variables like sleep and diet, right, you can gain strength surprisingly quickly. So you might have Thor Bjornsson, right, from Game of Thrones, right, the mountain. He's lifting way more weight than I am, and I'm lifting way more weight than the little old lady who lives down the street, right? We might all be able to use the same theory,
right,
of progressive overload to get stronger, but the supplemental exercises we're doing, that's the thing that makes us better and gets us to the next level where we can test our strength again, right? And it's going to be completely different from individual to individual. In the same way with organizations, I love the metaphor. Your overarching theory might be similar, like lean theory, but where you need to put the work in, those supplemental exercises, is very situational. So, I've worked in specific factories where lean was sort of top down, which you can make an argument it's not lean, right? It's a program in the company. And they decided we're going to have one 5S event per month. And that was somebody's job, somebody's task to do that, right? Well, that might not be what you need. You're not following the process, because it's really the core process is PDCA, right? That's the iterative, sort of scientific approach. Where's the failure point? And then what supplemental exercises do I need to get stronger at that failure point?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things in that. I mean, it's what your goal is, maybe some of the, some issues that I like that quote. It's attributed to him, but I don't know if it's that. It's about, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, about cars. Yeah. But it's the same thing with like plant side. It's like you've identified a problem, but it may not be the problem. It's just a symptom of something else that you've identified, and you're trying to fix that. And what I've seen in some of the places I've worked is where we've got some kind of monument, or that's a good term for it. But, you got a monument in your plant, something you can't move. And then you got monument people that's in your plant that they're working however they're working, and you can't move them. So you end up making processes around these people who are stuck in whatever it is. And you're like, well, we can't do that because, Richard, he's never going to give up whatever he's doing to get it done. So we'll just got to work around Richard.
Definitely a lot of that in my background, a whole lot. And I do think like a place where a lot of lean practitioners misstep is they just try to become serial innovators, where it's like, we're going to invent this, we're going to bring in this new technology, and their whole life's around innovating. I'm like, I appreciate where you started, but time out here, and let's just see what else we can do within our current sets of tools and powers and processes to solve this problem before we jump straight to innovation.
When we talk about situational lean, applying principles, applying tools, you made the really good point. They have to be applied towards a goal or an endpoint, right? And I used to call that the conversion rate. And in industrial engineering, sometimes you'll talk about your entitlement, right? Or your entitlement gap. So the way this process works, you should be realizing these outcomes. You're only realizing these outcomes. That gap is called the entitlement, right? Well, I see a similar gap between the process outcomes and the actual goal. And what is your conversion rate from the process outcomes to the goal you're actually trying to achieve? So a classic example is just the money goal. So some companies have an accounting goal, for example, saving a certain amount of money, reducing costs a certain amount, et cetera. And so they'll invest in improving a process and streamlining a process, but their major costs are the inputs, the input materials, and the labor. The labor stays the same. The input material costs stay the same. Maybe they go up, right? And so they don't reach their goal. So they had some idea of, what they wanted and how to get there, but they forgot the critical step of tying their improvement activities to their goal. There can be room, I think, for improvement without a goal, just improvement for the sake of improvement. And some common examples have to do with respect for people. A bigger break room, new televisions with bigger screens on them. Like, those are just sunk costs, but that's part of just being human. I mean, these guys are spending their whole life here. They spend more time here than at home. If you ignore the time that you're asleep, right, you spend more time at work. So let's get some more comfortable chairs in there, right? That's an example of an improvement that isn't tied to a goal. It's very touchy-feely. Like, the goal is to make people feel better, but you can't really measure it, right? Hi, everybody. I'm John Thacker.
And I'm Jake Harrow.
And we're the hosts of a quality podcast, which you already know because you're watching this podcast. We have some exciting news for you. After years of helping companies win at lean, continuous improvement, and operational excellence, and branching out into the consulting space, Jake and I are excited to announce that we have formed our own consulting partnership. Please give us a visit at www.zoomopex.com, which I just put across the bottom of the screen. We'd love to get in touch with you and talk about how we can help you win right now and in the future.
Win right now and in the future.
Right now.
And in the future.
Good. So when we talk about lean and how we're going to do it and continuous improvement, whatever tools we're using for operational excellence, there can be some improvement for improvement's sake. But for the most part, you have to have a target or a goal, and you have to tie your improvement to that target. And I worked for a company that required a board where in the operation we were changing something. We called them projects, but they weren't managed like a project. So that was just a convenient term for we're working on something. And you had to have a board that showed, here's the baseline metrics, and here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're doing it. And it was really well done. I really appreciated it. They would put up photographs of the team members doing stuff, kind of document the change, some before and after photos if it required or suggested, that sort of thing. And then the final metrics. And everybody was aligned on what we were trying to do. So we had this one work cell, and this is sort of theory of constraints, right? But everything was in line. It was a linear process, right? And this particular work cell had an output rate that was 1/2 of the next slowest piece of the chain, the critical chain. And the project was to improve the velocity, through this particular work cell. And the whole team was involved, and we had a project board up there. We had before and after metrics, and, we did really well. I think they came close to doubling the velocity through that cell. And there was a great team that involved some engineers and, the packaging team. So this particular cell involved repackaging materials. So you had inputs, you had packaging inputs, you had original packaging trash outputs, you had finished goods repackaged outputs. So it was a little complex, and the way that this company was able to document the improvement, it just kept everybody focused, and they were actually able to convert the effort and energy into what they were trying to do. So very situational, highly specific. Now contrast that with a company. I'm not tattling on anybody right now, but a, a company that may or may not be fictitious, where they decided we are going to buy these boards that are pre-branded with the company logo, and we're going to install them in the plant. And here's the first 5 steps, the first 5 lean steps. You're going to start by putting these boards up, and then you're going to do a 5S event, and then you're going to do this. Needless to say, the outcomes were dramatically different from the first example, not least of which was no change in business outcomes, as well as some confusion from the employees. They kind of didn't know what was going on, what the purpose was. It just became part of corporate culture. Like there's these, ninjas that run around and just do stuff, and we call it lean, and it looks pretty, and it has the corporate logo on it, right? So, James, tell me a little bit, about your experience with stuff like that, and some of the why that you speculate behind that, and some of the outcomes.
I think that is it's a function of culture, and it's a function of where you are in your process. And like the first example you gave, if you've got time to do it and everything's kind of okay, then you've got time and everybody can kind of focus and do the project. But if your house is burning down around you, then it's hard to bring in something like that and do it, because, well, you just can't put any effort into it really, because you got all these other problems. Now, the other thing is, even for me in some of the positions I've had, is you're given tasks, but you can do things as long as you don't affect the overall, like as long as you don't rock the boat, you can move the chairs around, and then hopefully you'll get some kind of improvement. And then so you get somebody put in, and it's like immediately you're, not them, but those improvement people are either on their own or they've put into a system, like Deming says, you work in the system you're given by your management. They've put in the system and then immediately find out they don't have any teeth to actually do anything important. And so instead of going to find another job where you actually can do something important, you find things that you can do that will not, upset Richard. Well, no. All right. I see Jake shouldn't now see. I got this weird sense of humor.
We can definitely blame weird sense of humor on Jake. I think he's.
I about said Richard the Monument, which is like a double entendre.
Well, it sounds like, John, if I was just listening through what you were saying there, that the company just didn't truly know how to win. And if anybody's curious and watching our show today, there's a nice book I'd like to recommend on the subject. Nice. This is John Thacker's Zoom, How to Win as an Operations Supervisor Right Now, and teaches you those lessons that you might skip over. If,
okay. All right. Yeah, I don't know how to take that. So
shameless plug, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad I've spent about 4 years as a supervisor. One in a route service, and then about 2 years as an injection mold supervisor. So on the floor working experience. And it's hard if you're fighting fires, or if you're just trying to get your day run, and then come along and you got 4 boards to update because the lean guy come in and put them up, or it's even more frustrating when you have to update stuff that nobody ever looks at. As an operations guy, I checked those boxes, but if you looked at what I checked, as you actually you can stand here and look what I checked, and then go like this and look down the way, and it's like, no, that didn't get done, but it's checked on the board, so we're good.
Yeah. No, that's a big problem that I've witnessed mostly with companies that have a business operating system and a corporate lean platform with bronze, silver, gold certification. It just turns into a checklist. It's something we do. So I like to play a game with clients and companies, and just for fun. It's called what's the least viable instantiation of an idea. Sometimes we will jump directly to the Cadillac, but I'm just trying to get to work and it's a quarter
Mhm.
mile down the road. I can walk. Well, that's waste. That's motion, right? Yeah, but it works, right? Okay,
Right.
so how can I reduce that waste? Well, guess what? Here's an electric moped on Craigslist for $50. I can use that instead of a Cadillac, right?
Right.
So I call it the least impactful viable instantiation of a theory. So you can put the idea into practice many different ways, um, but sometimes we only see a certain way to do it, and it's a very advanced way to do it, right? So I want to
Mhm.
go from being, Johnny Pencilneck to being Mr. Miyagi by painting a fence for a couple of months, right? I shouldn't pick on the Karate Kid, but I mean, it's the worst part. Like, it's a complete lie. You can't compete in a karate tournament after painting fences for a month, you know? Um, but that's what we want. We want to be able to read a book and be in a karate tournament. And it just doesn't work that way, right? You have to work your way up. Or as I like to say, you can't go from neutral to fifth gear, right?
Mhm.
There's a few gears in between, right? We just need to go to the next level. That's kind of where the continuous improvement thing comes in, is just take the next step that you can sustain, right? Jake, I think you have some really good stories about simple things around people that we did or that you did that had some significant effect on actual metric outcomes. Now, I'm thinking of a project we did together that we're not going to talk about because you know it's kind of proprietary information, but we were able to get the team to focus on five things. You remember that
Hmm.
project? Okay. So this was a behavioral engineering project that we did. Very successful. The only example of success that this particular plant in this particular company has ever seen before or since, where we got a change in employees' behaviors around five vectors. But the outcomes were measurable in all of our KPIs that we were responsible for as a plant, right? So, Jake, tell us, a little bit about that story without giving too much away.
Oh, well, absolutely. Let me see if I can put the same level of shadows on it that you do. But yeah, the long and short there, James, is what we did was identify what KPIs are failing. Obviously, a KPI is a trailing metric for whatever happened physically in the facility. Metrics come from processes, processes are led by behaviors. So without the clout to really innovate and adjust what the key processes are within the facility, we just identified the behaviors and came down to 4 or 5 things. The same basic things every plant across the country will struggle with. Stuff like parking your equipment where it belongs, or punching a time clock when you're supposed to, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. So we just picked the top 5, and then all we did was treat it like a presidential propaganda campaign where we're going to come up with a way to measure those 5 behaviors. We're going to celebrate the crap out of anybody we see doing those 5 behaviors, and anybody against that, we're going to have regular accountability as a peer group. And just that alone was far more effective than any innovation, than any process redesign, than any work cell redesign I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, so an example of some of the metrics outcomes in a less than 2 month period. So it was a 2 month reporting period, but we started like 2 weeks before this report out, right? So it was about a 6 week span with 2 months of data reporting in there. We had a KPI around damages, and we reduced our damages by 40% in that time frame. Amazing, astonishing. So many companies would give their left
Mhm.
arm to reduce their damages by 40%. But all we did was first we came to terms with what we couldn't change. This is important, right? We could
Right.
not change the processes. We just didn't have the authority to do that. And really the way that the organizational structure, the customers, suppliers, and everything were set up, it would have been very difficult even if the CEO of the company said, change your processes right now, right? It would be a large project because of the interconnectedness. So we knew we couldn't change that. So then we just went to Gemba and said, what's happening in Gemba that's resulting in some of these outcomes? Okay, what do they need to do differently? What does the team need to do differently? And then we just said, here's how we're going to be the best we can possibly be. Just these things. That's all we're going to look at. Right? So that was a really tremendous metric outcome. The other one had to do with cost efficiency. So by changing behaviors around clocking in and out, around where equipment was stored and parked, just some basic accountability around these things, we reduced the amount of time that people were spending in non-value added activity, which added up because we're talking about hundreds of employees, right? It added up. And then also, it immediately made non-compliance visible. So before that, there was such a mess around getting equipment at the start of the shift that if somebody was loafing, you couldn't tell.
Right.
All of a sudden, the guy that for the last 5 years has been clocking in and then going and hanging out in the break room and eating his Twizzler while he waits for the mess to die down so he can go get equipment without all of the people that he doesn't like, right? All of a sudden, you can see that, right? And so we saw pretty significant gains in cost efficiency as well. Not 40%, but it was like 3%. That's pretty good for 6 weeks of work. I think anybody would, look for that. So great example. I think that was a great example of situational continuous improvement where we understood multiple theories that contribute to a CI environment, multiple disciplines, but we didn't say, okay, here's the path, guys. First, we're going to get our visual management in place and have a visual management wall and make it pretty. And then we're going to 5S the crap out of this place. And then, instead, we were able to apply the theory because we understood it to where we were actually at and get results right now. Win right now. That's one of our mottos, and build a platform to be built on in the future as well.
Right. James, you got any big work wins you'd like to share?
Well, when I was in injection molding, just by taking some ownership of how everything ran, I think we were running at like 65, and I got it up to like our OEE up to 75%. But that come from just kind of being proactive in the start of the shift with, okay, coming in and looking at the schedule and then figuring out how everybody's going to be. And then proactive is the word of being a little bit ahead of the situation as opposed to behind the situation and taking ownership of the actual schedule and how it ran. Like I'd work with the schedulers a lot to say, all right, well, here's the situation. Here's how many people I've got tonight. I may have to shut something down, or what do you really, really need, and versus what you're just running because we don't want to run it on Friday, so we're going to run it tonight. And then verifying materials and working with some of the training with the lead tech people and the group leaders and the employees of just running it proactively.
Yeah, the hardest thing to do is use that long brain to abstract how the day is going to go and plan accordingly.
Yeah.
Manufacturing consistently struggles with that.
Yeah, I love that story for a couple of reasons, right? One of which is just saying the word proactive, right? That is the key to operational excellence, is how far ahead you can actually plan for stuff. And that is related to repeatability and reliability, which is why you have statistical process control and all of these fancy tools. People forget that the entire purpose of that is predictability, so I can be ahead of the game, right? Predictability is amazing. The other thing, though, when we are talking about making improvements, I had mentioned earlier the minimum viable product, right? That's what I stole that from, right? From the world of software engineering. Minimum viable product is, what can I get out to the market that at least works, right? I can make it pretty later. I can fix it later, right? So minimum viable instantiation of a theory. Let's play a game. We're going to improve a business process right now, right, as a group. So we have a fabrication shop, and when the team starts in the morning, they have to check out a handheld electronic device that they use for scanning materials, accessing BOMs, updating inventory and stuff as they work, right? Tracking the productivity, all of that. So they come into work and they're looking around, and this guy left his on this desk, and most of them get put on the supervisor's desk at the end of the last shift. And, they're spending 15 minutes getting set for the day. That's the current state, right? Well, you can imagine a perfect state scenario where an employee walks through the door, a retinal scanner pops out, logs them in, clocks them in, right? And this arm comes down out of the ceiling, and it's got their handheld device, and they grab it, and it's Lego City.
Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when we're part of the team. Everything is awesome.
Everybody's happy, right? So that is science fiction. It's a wonderful science fiction, but emphasis on the fiction, right? What's the MVP, minimum viable product? And the first thing is just identifying, you don't have to classify the types of waste. You just see the waste. People are standing around doing nothing because they're looking for their stuff. So I need to know where my stuff is in the morning, and it has to work. I don't need Johnny over there. I can't get the screen to come up when I tap with the pen. It keeps chasing the cursor around. You can tell I've actually done this before, right? And then, do I look like a fucking IT guy? Come on, man. I don't know how to figure. You use it every day. You tell me, right? And it's a downward spiral from there. And next thing you know, it's lunchtime and you haven't got anything done. Right? So the equipment has to be immediately accessible, and it has to work. That's it. So how do you solve that? Right. So non-minimum viable product, you've got the old, 1960s union labor cage where you pay some guy to sit there and guard this stuff, and somebody comes up and it's like, let me see your ID badge. Now I'm going to write it down in a log. Does anybody read that log? Give me one reason why you're writing that name down. How about if I have a question, I can just ask and be like, yeah, Bob was in here today. Right? And then I hand you the equipment through the cage, that's slightly reminiscent of high school or possibly a state prison. And we can go to work, right? Obviously, a lot of cost involved in that as a solution, but it might be the only thing right? So let's do some IE here, man. What are some alternatives?
I don't know, but your example of the retinal scanner and stuff, yeah, thinking about this industrial engineering dystopian future novel.
I thought he said rectal scanner, and I was freaking out at first.
Well,
that's an idiocracy.
Yeah, I don't think. Wow. I know some. Never mind.
James, how do we make this situation better? Finding your RF devices in your manufacturing shop.
I don't know. That's like, it's radios has been the places I've worked that people are hunting for.
Radios. Let's make them radios. For the purpose of this conversation, this is radios.
Radios.
How do I make it work? How do I know where my radio is at all times?
Well, let's start with talking through what we need and the minimum viable product. So what I need is everything in one place, and I need it to work. So here's the minimum viable product. The supervisor comes in 5 minutes early and checks every radio to make sure it works. At the end of the shift, the supervisor walks around with a cardboard box and everyone puts their radio in it.
Or you just mount the radios on the forklifts.
Yeah.
And worry about it.
That minimum viable product that we just shared is actually completely feasible for everybody in every situation. Like anyone can do that, right? And it actually doesn't have much cost, especially since you're probably paying your supervisor salary. So fuck him. He can come in 5 minutes early.
Or you're just paying for zip ties to go with James's route and just mounting them to a
Yeah.
forklift or what have you.
Is
I mean,
it-
it's a no-cost solution.
But mounting him to the fork truck doesn't have a test feature. That was
Is
one of
this
the things we identified. Got to make sure
the
it works.
subtitle of your book?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Rectal Scanners and Radios by John Thacker.
Operational supervisors, fuck them.
Yeah.
Their salary. Hey, look, but that's you worked in
Just
places
fine
where the
here.
management was like that, you know.
Well, and I'm able to joke about it because
Yeah.
being a supervisor, and that's how I was treated, you know. And now I'm on a mission to make sure nobody gets treated that way again, right? But let's say that that's the minimum viable product, and you just do it. It's a just do it. I've literally done this. Like, this is a solution I've done, right?
Yeah.
Throw it in the damn cardboard box, and then at the beginning of each shift, click both buttons and hold them together. If they squeal, they work. You know, move on to the next one. But then what's the next step? Right. And the next step is distributed workload. That means that the individuals using the equipment are testing their own equipment. You know, at one point we had to put in a sanitation protocol because of COVID. That was new. Mm-hmm. And eventually you can evolve to where the employees are holding themselves accountable, right? I'm going to put the radio back here every time, and I'm going to test it and make sure it works before I put it back. One of the things that's going to empower that is my employer has a process for broken equipment where I don't get punished if it's broken, right? I'm not going to get
James, why'd you break your radio?
Exactly.
Right.
Or 2 or 3 radios get broken, and then it's like, these guys are just breaking these radios. Why don't we even have them? There's these
exactly.
radios are $150 a piece, $200. They're breaking them. It's just a pain in the ass. So you guys are just going to have to, if you can't not break them, then you're just going to have to deal without them. And
it's $2,000 a day in the communication because now guys are traveling back and forth across a gigantic warehouse. Yeah.
That's called cutting off your nose to spite your face. Yeah. That's what that's called. So, true story. You know, I came across a fellow who was deconstructing a fork truck mounted radio to take for his truck, and I just asked, "What are you doing, man?" He's like, "Well, my radio doesn't work and I need it for work, and this truck has a working radio, so I'm taking this, this, and this." I'm like, I'm proud of you. You solved your problem and you're getting right back to work. That's pretty cool. But then I went, back into the management group and asked, why does this guy have to do that? And the answer was, we had, a Fred Flintstone era method for repairing and replacing broken radios and radio parts. And I had parts of radios sitting in my office that had been sitting there for 6 months. Well, we have to fill out this form online and blah, blah. And, there's a warranty, so we won't have to pay for it, but the process is long. I'm like, we're paying for it right now.
Yeah.
How much I'm paying in labor while this guy doesn't have a radio? Go to Radio Shack, buy a radio, and give it to that guy. I don't know. Is Radio Shack still a business? But
no, it's not.
I just dated myself, so I guess they'll never be a sponsor.
This message brought to you by Flintstone. Are your processes yubba dubba do?
So I like that exercise. I like doing exercises like that because, people that read books and see factories in action sometimes dramatically misunderstand lean, right, and what it is. James, fantastic conversation. It's hard to believe that it's already been an hour. Really appreciate you joining today. Do you have any words of wisdom or final thoughts for our listeners out there?
Predictability in your lead process, like if you got an assembly line or something, or an injection mold machine or something, but predictability in that process and how it affects everything else. And then you talked about you've got a process to do something, but the process is too cumbersome. So people just work around the process. So your process is to work around the process that you set up to fix the thing. So you get all this other weird stuff. And then the third one was scheduling equipment. Like injection mold machines this was at a CNC shop, but uh, once you have scarcity in your machines, then your planners or the people scheduling become like wolves, and like your machines are your sheep, and then the wolves end up. So you might get a strong planner who's like, that's my machine. You don't schedule anything on that. I've got this stuff set up. And then the other, so you get like an alpha wolf that schedules everything and he's taking care of his needs for the next 6 months or her needs. And then everybody else has got to kind of like work around and take the bits and pieces of what's left over now that there's scarcity. And uh, so that's just a metaphor you can dive deep into. But basically, they're consuming all the resources, and then you can't get done what you need done when you when you need it done, because there's scarcity there because the planners eat it all up. Um, that's kind of weak, but I like that when I was thinking about scheduling things through that CNC shop.
Yeah, great. We appreciate the insight. We appreciate the conversation and humor. Thanks so much for joining
Well,
us.
thank you for asking me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I had
absolutely.
fun.
For everybody out there in YouTube land, thank you for joining a quality podcast. Goodbye.